Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thanks so much for joining today. If you are wondering if you should take your relationship and your bank account to the next level, today I'm going to talk to you about 5 different considerations that you want to have before you decide to combine your finances. So, spoiler alert, there is no right answer, but there's some things that I want you to consider. If you're new here, I'm Teri Slater, a financial coach that helps couples get on the same page and get out of debt so they can win with money. So if you are new here, I would love for you to type new in the chat so that I can see who I've got here today. I recognize some familiar faces, and thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to jump right in there and talk about a couple of key points and things that you want to consider before you combine finances together. So the first is when you're talking about splitting bills and whether or not each of you have your own spending money, there's a lot of different ways that people actually do their bank accounts. And so I'm going to talk about like 3 different ways that people actually do merge their finances, and then you can see if this resonates with you or if you've done one of these 3. So the first one is going to be just like total pooling, like everybody's income goes into one bucket and all the bills and all the spending comes out of that one bucket. So something that is a pro with this, like pros and cons, is a pro is that it makes things super easy, right? It's all in and it's all out, and you're not messing with like moving money around in different accounts. However, something that's a con with that is that when it comes to, gift giving or surprises, sometimes it's a little bit hard to, keep some things a little bit, separate or private if you're trying to do a little something special. So there can be pros and cons to just like pooling everything all together. What some couples do is they will actually have like 3 different bank accounts where it's like yours, mine, and ours. And then what they do is they basically like maintain their own individual bank accounts, but then they put all of their money for the bills together into one account. And so that one account essentially is going to cover the rent and mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, diapers, baby food, all those kind of things too. And then everybody else has their own separate accounts for like all the miscellaneous spending. Let's just talk about what can happen with that. So what sometimes can happen is that if you have a couple where one person is a spender and the other person is a saver, you may or may not be having conversations with each other about those things. And so if you're in a lifelong partnership and maybe you're like looking forward to retirement or looking forward towards like big vacations and things like that, and then you realize that only one person is actually saving any money towards those goals and the other person is just kind of like spending everything that comes in, then there's some dynamics there that start to become a little bit less about just the math and the numbers, and it's a little bit more about like how we actually feel about money. So there's some conversations that need to be had around if you do decide to combine finances, how do you want to do it? Another way that people will do it is where they'll keep everything, pretty much separated, and then, maybe one person will say like, okay, I'm gonna cover the rent and utilities, you cover like all the groceries, the cell phone bill, like all those things. And so people can either split that like 50-50, or you can do it like as a percentage of like who earns more. So if you've got, let's say one person in the relationship earns $50,000 a year and the other person earns like $80,000 a year, then the person who makes more money might take on more of that responsibility. So that can be all well and good too, again, if things consistently stay the same, but that is generally not how life works. So if you're in a situation where, again, you're in kind of a long-term partnership and you've split up the bills in that way, then it starts to become really interesting, if you decide to do bigger commitments, such as, moving up in house or having children or, adding pets or things like that. Or maybe one person decides that they don't really love their job and so they want to quit and they don't have something else lined up. There can be a lot at play there between the dynamics when you're kind of like splitting up bills based on like who's earning. And also sometimes like there can be a shift between who earns more and going back and forth. And do you want to kind of constantly have those conversations? So that's like 3 different ways that people can kind of split their bills and keep their spending money either like separate or pooled all together. I'm totally curious if you've done one of these 3, like which one have you done? Type that in the comments for me because I'd love to hear about that. And I also want to say that nothing has to be static. So when I was married, we essentially the whole time we were dating, we had separate accounts, and as soon as we got married, we just pooled everything together. And then things started to become a little bit more stressful where I found myself having some concerns about, you know, the money that was going out of the account. And it felt a little bit hard for me to control because I was the one that did all the money in the relationship. I paid all the bills and kind of managed everything. And so eventually I did reach a point where I said, I think I'm going to separate this and get my own bank account. And so what had started out as pooling ended up being, separating of finances. So you know what? It doesn't have to stay. You don't have to pick one option and then just stick with it. You can totally change it up. So that's the first thing to consider is how do you logistically want to manage your actual bank accounts? Okay, so the second thing that I want you to consider is bigger conversations as far as, is anyone in the relationship bringing in debt? So maybe someone has like a lot of student loans where the other person doesn't, or one person has credit card debt, the other person doesn't. Maybe one person is bringing in kids to the relationship and the other's not. Or maybe you're both bringing in kids. And so then there's, these sort of like separate, family situations that are going on. So sometimes people will keep finances separated because of that too. What if somebody has a business that's already been a long established business and now you're bringing that into a new relationship? So, there's a lot of different things to consider. So talk about these kinds of things and figure out, what do you feel like feels good to both of you as far as whether or not you want to merge your finances, because you can just keep everything completely separate too. So, the third thing I want you to consider is like future family. So this is kind of somewhat geared more towards like younger couples. So I know that there are certain personal finance gurus out there who say like the minute you get married, it's no longer yours and mine, it's ours. Everything is, we are now one, right? And everything should always be combined. But I don't believe that there's one right answer. I think you get to make the decision. But I also want to make sure that you're having forward-looking conversations about what you think your future might look like. So some people have really fantastic intentional conversations about what they want their life to look like moving forward. And so if you don't yet have kids, are you going to have a conversation about like what will it be like to have kids? And you do have to talk about what that looks like financially too, because sometimes you've got 2 parents that both want to go back to work. Well, now you've got daycare expenses, right? Or, some sort of childcare. But maybe you've got someone who wants to leave their job and stay home with the kids. That's a consideration because now maybe you're going to lose one income. So there's a lot to really like dig into when you look at future changes. And it's not just about like the family dynamic. It can also be, just looking at your future as far as, do we want to travel together? What does travel mean to you? Like, are we talking about like, overseas trips around the world? Are we going to be on the road most days out of the year or just have, like one trip every year or 2? These are all the kind of things that you want to talk about. The type of house that you want, maybe somebody wants a giant farm and the other person wants like a condo in downtown. So, talk about a lot of these like future looking goals as early as possible. Things change, of course, people change and our goals change, but it's really good to have these conversations. So I'm going to also direct you to the comments below too. In the description, I have a link to a guide that I have created, and it is Relationships and Money Conversation Starters. And so it's really designed to make the conversation easy and fun and relaxing, and they're easy questions, right? So they're just kind of things that will get your thought processes going. But if you haven't had any conversations about money, this is a good starting point. If the only conversations that you've ever had about money have been fights, then this might be a nice way to kind of back it up and say, let's have some like easy conversation, right? Like, grab some dinner, go get some coffee, maybe be in a public place if you feel like you want to sort of have a buffer of the environment, and have some easy conversations. So grab those conversation starters. I think it will be helpful. Okay, the thing number 4 that I want you to consider is planning. And I kind of talked about this a little bit too with like, future family and considerations for like retirement and travel and where you want to live, those kind of things. But I think that you also want to look at planning for the future and how do you take steps towards that now. And it can also be having conversations about, I don't want to say planning, but I want to say having conversations about what the two of you want your money to look like in whatever combined situation that you have. So, are you both okay with the other person having, let's just say each of you decide like each month we get, $500 each to just blow on whatever we want. Maybe one person will decide not to blow that money and they start saving that instead. Maybe they're saving it up for a longer term goal. Maybe the other person just goes out and buys like a new pair of shoes every month or a new purse every month, or, takes everybody out, all the friend group out, for a weekend away. And then whether or not you start to actually have opinions about what they are spending their money on, that is when things can start to get a little bit complicated. So I think it's really good to kind of talk about these things if you're sort of planning it out and saying, okay, like let's each have our own like spending money account. And that helps for like, gift giving and things like that too. It keeps it, it's easier to like, hide purchases from each other, and that can be good or that can be bad. You can have some good hiding of purchases and also some financial infidelity in there too. So, but talk about these things in advance. That way, going into it, how you both feel about it and what kind of boundaries you have around it. Okay, and so the last thing that I want to give you, number 5, is it's again about values. So sort of your like everyday spending. I want you both to talk about or think about how much will you scrutinize? How much will you have boundaries in place where you might be saying no, where the other person wants to say yes? One good example of this is if maybe you have a very active social life, like together, but if you've got goals that you're working towards, and maybe somebody wants to, spend less or save more, and the other person is like, no, I'm all about having fun, like spend it while you got it, you can't take it with you, right? These are all different like mindsets and ideas and thoughts that we have about money. And usually our thoughts about money are varied from person to person. So if you've got one person that's really like, I don't really care about saving for the future, tomorrow isn't promised, maybe you want to like look at those kind of things now, and how do you feel about that? If they're the type of person that, when you go out for happy hour, they want to like take all their buddies along too and make sure to buy a round of drinks or two, or, treat people to dinner, that kind of thing. So really kind of talk about like what your everyday spending will also look like, and to what level of transparency do you both feel comfortable with. If you are keeping things pretty separate, especially too if you're looking at like, second marriages, third marriages, things like that. Sometimes people have, historical things going on over here, or, just other circumstances where maybe they don't want to be super financially transparent, and that's okay. But you want to know that going into it so that you can talk about how that makes you feel. So there's just a lot of different things to consider there. Okay, so that was 5 things that I want you to consider. Again, there's no right answer on whether or not you should combine your finances, but there is a right conversation to have. And so there's a lot of things that I gave you here to think about, to talk about. So sit down together, grab the conversation starters. That's again in the description below this video. And reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I think, having money conversations can be fun. It doesn't always have to be like challenging or stressful. So hopefully you can have some fun with it. Maybe you'll learn something about each other, and then you can make the decision for yourself if you want to combine those finances or not. All right, everyone, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.